We've talked about the vows made under duress or vows which are just clearly ridiculous and vows which are exaggerations, and they're not accepted by the sages. They don't hold. But now we're going to get into a different class of vows made under duress because we are trying to get out of a difficult situation. And we recall that Maimonides said there are actually two kinds of vows under duress. There's someone who, for example, subjects his neighbor to a vow to have dinner with him, and then maybe, he gets ill, or maybe a river overflows, so the guest can't arrive, right? In other words, the fulfillment of the vow is under duress, and the sages actually cut us some slack there. But what if the vow itself is taken under duress? That's the second category, which Maimonides outlines. And the Mishnah begins. We're in the fourth Mishnah of the third chapter of Nedarim. Nodrim liharagim v'lacharamim v'lamochsin shehi teruma. One can vow to murderers or to robbers or to tax collectors that it is truma. Afal pi she'ena truma, even if it's not. So these guys are coming after us. They might be legal or illegal, it seems, and they want our truma, and they want our food, and we swear to them it's truma, even though we know that it's not. I mean, really interesting insight, by the way, into the mentality of the thief, which the Bartanura comments on. It seems that this guy is a murderer and a thief, and yet he won't take truma because it's a holy object. Or perhaps he won't take truma because it's sold at a lower price in the market. We're not quite sure. But anyway, really interesting commentary on the scale of values of these murderers and robbers, that somehow they respect truma more than they respect property and life. And along the same lines, we can swear Shehen Levei Hamelech, that these objects belong to the king's house. Afal pi she'ena la shelahem, but even when they don't, even if it doesn't. So it seems as though we have a get out, and very interesting, by the way, as to how this applies today. Let's look at the Bartanura. I can't resist showing you the Bartanura, who himself, by the way, is quoting from the Rambam. So this is the Bartanura, but Maimonides says almost exactly the same comment. So when we're talking about tax collectors, we're talking the mochesa or med me'elav. We're talking about some tax collector who seems to be self-appointed, or med me'elav. He's kind of self-appointed. Aval moches shehemido hamelech. But as regards a tax collector appointed by the king, bein melech Yisrael, bein melech nochri, whether it's a Jewish king or a non-Jewish king, and then he takes a specified amount, the var katsuv. So he seems to take a legal amount, b'chok malchut, as the law of the kingdom. At that point, we have this principle, dina de malchut dina, the law of the land is the law. At that point, we have to obey. And the Bartanura concludes, asur livroach min hameches. It is absolutely forbidden to flee from tax. And all the more so, in other words, it's forbidden even to avoid paying the tax. And all the more so is it forbidden to vow or swear falsely. So these examples where we're allowed to vow falsely, the murderers, the robbers, are tax collectors, this seems to apply to bandit tax collectors, not to the king's tax collectors. And Beit Shammai say, Beit Shammai omrim bakol nodrin chutz mi bashvua. Beit Shammai say you can make any kind of vow except a shavua, except an oath. An oath is more heavy duty than a vow. Uveit Hillel omrim af bishvua. Beit Hillel say even an oath. Beit Hillel are going to protect the interests of the man in the street. Beit Shammai omrim lo yiftach lo, but lo yiftach lo v'neder. Beit Shammai say, look, we don't volunteer to vow. So we only vow when we're forced to vow. Beit Hillel omrim af yiftach Ben Hillel says, no, we can actually open with a vow. If we're trying to get away from these murderers or rogue tax collectors. Beit Shammai omrim b'mashehu madiro. Beit Shammai, remember Beit Shammai say, we can't volunteer to vow. We only vow what we're instructed to vow. And then he's going to go on to say, we can only vow as much as the murderer makes us vow. Uveit Hillel omrim, af b'ma she'eino madiro. Beit Hillel says, look, even we can overvow, even in respect to what we're not asked to vow, we can vow. And by the way, when Beit Hillel says we can make this vow, he is implicitly saying we are not bound by this vow. There's no punishment for making a false vow under these circumstances. The vow has no meaning. So even though the words are said, the intention or the thinking behind it disallows it. It's really, really interesting example where the law is overturned by the thinking. And these examples are rare examples. We'll see one more in the next Mishnah, but really, really interesting to think about what is going on here. If you like, we've seen that the articulation of a vow can create a legal reality. And now we're seeing that the thinking behind the articulation of a vow can create a different kind of legal reality as well. Now, what if he overvows? This is really where the Mishnah is going to start exploring a little bit more. Kate Sud. How does it work? Amrulo, emor kunam ishti nehenetli. So how does it work? So they said to him, kunam be any benefit my wife has from me. In other words, my wife really can't enjoy anything of mine. And we've already learned this is a very serious oath because, I mean, if you can't support your wife, you have to divorce her. And what's the context here? I think the context here is they've told him that this food is truma, or this food belongs to the king, or they've told him some other lie to get away from the murderer or the tax collector or the robber. And they say, oh yeah, swear me an oath that what you said is true. So you can say, oh yeah, any benefit my wife has for me is like a korban if I lie. That's kind of the overall phrase. The Mishnah is being very, very economical. And then he might go further. They've asked him to forswear any benefit, to if you like, prohibit any benefit his wife has from him. And he actually goes further. He mentions his children as well. Ve'amar, unam ishti uvanai nehenimli. He actually says, unam be any benefit my wife and my children have of me. So he goes one step beyond what he's asked to do. Beit Shammai omrim, ishto muteret uvanav asurin. Beit Shammai are actually going to say, his wife is permitted, that is to say, the vow doesn't hold on his wife, but his children are forbidden, i.e., the vow holds on his children. It's an impossible situation. Uveit Hillel omrim, as we would expect, Beit Hillel say, Elu va'elu mutzaren. Both are permitted. No part of this vow stands, even if he went beyond what he was originally asked to do. What about a different kind of situation and a different kind of thinking? So we are still in danger, and we are still in the context of thinking, but we're segueing to a slightly different situation. What he says is as follows. Behold, these are a korban, these saplings are a korban, if they're not cut down. He's clearly worried that maybe there's a storm blowing. I mean, this is the classic explanation. There's a storm blowing. He's really afraid that his trees are going to get blown over in the storm. And he says, look, if they survive, I promise them to the temple. That's essentially what he's saying. If they survive, it's a bit like we read the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah. This boy's going to be promised to the temple, Chana's son. These saplings are going to be promised to the temple if they survive the storm. Or he might say, Ve'talit zo korban im eina nisrafet. This garment is a korban if it's not burned. We seem to be, maybe there's danger of fire, maybe the city's burning, maybe the house is burning. He's not sure he can get away from the fire with his garment intact. He makes this vow. And the Mishnah goes on to rule, yesh lahen pidyon, they can be redeemed. Now, the basic halacha is that if we dedicate something to the temple, which can't be brought on the altar, and the saplings can't be brought on the altar, and the garment can't. So this is just property. If we dedicate something to the temple, which is property, we can redeem it with money. And this is what people would normally do. They'd redeem it with money, and then they'd give the money to the temple. So far, so good. What if he says, Harenis yoha elu korban ad she yukat seitsu? He says, behold, these saplings are a korban until he cuts them down. This is really different because he's giving a time limit. He's not giving an if. He's actually giving a clear time limit. Until they're cut down, they're a korban. Or, vetalit zo korban ad shetisaref. This garment's a korban until it is burned. And this is very interesting, that slight difference of phrasing. The words have power. So we're going back. This is not a situation where thoughts are cancelling out words. The words have power. Ein lahem pidyon. They can't be redeemed. I mean, he can redeem for money and bring the money to the temple, but the objects retain their sanctity until the end of the time interval which he specified. These objects do not lose their sanctity until the time that he specified. His words have legal force.